Okay, so I'm gonna start screen sharing in a second. Okay, so you're at the interview phase stage. Congratulations. So this is exciting when candidates get to this part because you are qualified for the position. And now the employer or the organization, they really want to see who you are in person or hopefully in person. I know that right now things are still being conducted virtually, but they want to get to know you for a little bit longer period of time than maybe a phone interview or, well, I guess a phone interview too could work at this point where they just want to get to know you. They want to be able to interact back and forth, ask questions of you. And then they also may potentially want to kind of sell you on them. So it can go both ways where you're trying to say, I'm really qualified, you should choose me. But they are also saying, hey, this is who we are. This is who we are as an organization. This is what we value. These are the things that we're doing. So it goes both ways at this point, but it's important to be able to interact. And that's why interviews are conducted. Okay. That, ah. You'd think I would be better at operating a slideshow on Zoom, but here I am. So things to do to prepare yourself before the interview. Like I had mentioned earlier, make an appointment with us. We will take a look at what is the job description, where are you interviewing, thinking about who the company is, and we'll help you through that process of maybe trying to guess which questions might be asked, and making sure that you're prepared to answer a whole range of questions. For you all, it's going to be important to research the company, find them on LinkedIn, see what they're posting, look at their website. Do they have newsletters that they put out? Do they have any blogs? Do they have anything of that nature where you can start to gain insight on who they are? You're going to want to prep your application materials and make sure that you have those on hand ready to go with you to the interview. If it's on Zoom or some type of virtual format, make sure that you have those ready to go on the day of. Picking out appropriate clothing. And this is always an interesting one because I think that traditionally we have thought, oh, I have to wear a suit and tie, or some sort of very professional looking attire. And I think that that can still be the case for many industries. But I also think that people are starting to relax a little bit, where like khakis, a nice cardigan, and a professional looking shirt can also maybe be appropriate. So pick out appropriate clothing for the type of industry that you are interviewing with. And get opinions. If you don't know what to wear, ask people. All right. So when you're thinking about being in that interview and having to answer those types of questions, you need to think through them. Be prepared to talk about you, not about things that have happened in your previous experiences, but about what you have experienced, what you've learned, what skills you've obtained. What are your goals? What are your values? It's all about you. And I think that can be that that can be really a lot sometimes for people to focus so much in on themselves, talking about who they are and how they have all these skills and are really qualified for the position. But that's what you have to do in this instance. So thinking about those questions beforehand and being prepared to talk about them is going to be an important piece of preparing for answering these interview questions. You want to think about what are your strengths and why they're going to be useful to this company, and then give an example of how you have utilized them or acquired them. And same thing with weaknesses. So I know that we did have one question that someone posed, like, how do you answer that strengths and weaknesses question? And I actually might answer that here, because this is a typical question. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And it may be phrased differently. It may be, what's something you're really good at, or what's something that you can bring to this organization, or what's an area that you're working on. So it can be phrased differently, but it's all essentially the same thing. Is you're answering what's your strengths, what's your weakness. So strengths are usually you can pick out a strength and have that again backed up with some kind of verifiable evidence. Don't pick out four strengths. Don't run on forever. And then as far as a weakness goes, or an area that you can work on, I think as humans, we all have areas that we can work on. And I think that a lot of employers are kind of over the whole, let me tell you my weakness and turn it into a strength. And so I think being genuine about what's an area that you are currently working on to better yourself is a good approach for a weakness question. I have a tendency to procrastinate if I get really overwhelmed. One way that I've been dealing with that is by, I have multiple lists. I, keep things in my calendar. I work through things. I talk to my supervisor about how to delegate out some other responsibilities. So that's just an example of how, like, there is an area I can work on. I procrastinate, but here's what I've been doing to get better at it. And that's genuine. It's, you're honestly answering the question versus trying to say, oh, well, I do so much and I work so hard and sometimes I can get overwhelmed, but I just end up doing all of these things, and they kind of take a strength or a weakness and turn it into a strength. And I think people are a little bit tired of that approach. So, but it's definitely one of those questions that we can work on with you if you'd like to make an appointment with us. Okay. Next slide, maybe. Okay, so here are a couple of common interview questions that you might see. And these are all ones that can reflect your strengths. And so we have lots of handouts that have a lot of interview questions that you might be posed during an interview session. And so what I think is really important is when you're preparing to practice answering these questions, right? And maybe you practice by writing them down. Maybe you practice by doing a mock interview with us at the Career Center. Maybe you interview with yourself in front of a mirror. Maybe you talk to a friend. But it's important to start to get those ideas out and see how they start to flow together for common questions such as these. How do you solve problems? How do you make decisions? How do you work well with others? Or how do you plan and organize? All of these are very, very common questions in most interviews. Okay. So behavioral questions. These are the type of interview questions that an employer is looking to see how have you behaved in the past. When you've had some of these experiences, what have you done? And so this is where you want to take the SAR approach. You want to talk about the situation. So, here it is, tell me about a time when you disagreed with a supervisor. So what was the situation? Tell them when you disagreed with the supervisor. And then you want to take the action step. So S was the situation, A is the action step. So what did you do? What and not what happened. What did you do? Because again, this is about you and how you have worked through some of these situations. And then lastly is the result of it. So what did occur after you explain the situation, you talk about the action that you took. And so that is one approach to working through these behavioral type of questions. And it's important to think ahead of time. All right, let me think of some situations that I've been through that might hit on behavioral questions, such as the ones below. When did you disagree with the supervisor? When have you utilized leadership? Can you tell me about a customer service experience? So these, again, are very common type of behavioral questions. So one big piece of the interview is when you get to kind of quote unquote interview them. And it's a very important piece. And oftentimes I've been in interviews where the interviewee will just say, "Oh, I don't have any questions. I think you answered them all." And that right there tells me that, maybe they don't care enough, or it gives me kind of a bad impression when an interviewee doesn't have any questions to ask. So it's usually at the end of the interview session. And you should really think ahead of time. What are some important questions that you would like to know about the organization, or what is it like to work there? Or maybe you have a specific question that came up because of the interview. But either way, it shows that you're interested, that you've done your research on the company, and that you have really taken the time to think through what you want to know about them. So this is, again, a very, very important piece of it. And it's not like it's only, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe 15 at the max if there's good conversation going back and forth. You're not looking to ask 5, 10 questions, maybe 2 questions, maybe a third if you think it's really important. So have this be, it is an important piece of the interview, but it doesn't have to take up that much time. Questions to avoid. Do not ask about the salary, and do not ask about your health insurance, the retirement, how much vacation you're allotted. Those are not appropriate at this phase. When you do want to ask those questions, maybe when you get offered the position, depending on the level of the company, that might be more of an human resources type of question. But you want them to want you first. So you don't want to bog them down with all of these kind of nitty gritty, salary questions, or how much does health insurance cost, or how much retirement do I get? Those come after they have offered you the position. And you can decline based upon some of those answers that you get, but you have to want them to want you first.
Lisa, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I know in some interviews they actually ask you about salary, like what are you looking for a salary, and do you have any recommendations on how to answer that?
That's always a tough one, Sarah. To be really honest, it's I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of when they do that, but needless to say, you're correct. It does happen. So that comes back into the preparation phase. I think that you can look up and see what are other people in this position making, roughly. There's different states have different like labor statistics and wage statistics and things of that nature. And then you've got to factor in, cost of living as well. So it does require some research into, what do you deserve to be paid? And maybe that's also based upon your education. Is you graduating with an undergraduate degree, or are you getting, do you have your master's? Do you have your PhD? So I think all of those can be factors. And so, yes, you should probably think about what you want to say, and then maybe cross your fingers and hope they don't ask you to say that.
Or maybe give a range, or say something like the market. I've seen from the market, the range is this, or something like that.
You're right. Instead of just being like, I think I should be paid $75,000 a year. You're right. Back it up with some verifiable evidence. I've seen a range is always good. And I think putting it in that format is a great way to put it, of saying, I've seen that other people in this position are making, $70,000 a year. I have all of the skills, qualification, and education that is needed and for this position. So saying something along those lines is, I think, is a good way to approach it. And I guess I'll also say, I often see the salary question come up in like applications as well. Do you see that as well, Sarah? Like you have to put a salary, or like, what do you expect to get paid, like on applications and things like that, especially if it's a more computerized type application.
Yes. Yeah, and I think you have to put in sometimes like your salaries from your last 3 jobs and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. But either way, it's a it can be potentially, it can make people sometimes feel a little bit uncomfortable. But I think if you go back to preparing to answer that question, then you'll feel more comfortable when it gets to that point.
And for our students, so another big question that could come up on either side is about visa sponsorship. And I'm sorry, maybe you answer this later, but so it could, the interviewer could ask, do you need visa sponsorship, or now or in the future? Sometimes a lot of times now that's in the application itself. But then I think a lot of people may be wondering that in the interview, and so the interviewee might ask, or could potentially ask, will you sponsor me for a visa? So is that a good question, or should that also be kind of avoided?
That, that's another tough one, because I think you're number one, I think that you're right. It's in a lot of the application materials nowadays. And I think last time, I can't remember if it was the first one of these sessions or not, but you encouraged people to say yes, that you will need sponsorship. And I think that we get a lot of questions at the Career Center about, like, do I have to say yes? Because then they won't look at me. And I think being truthful is I think that's a really important piece of that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think over the years, what I have seen is definitely be truthful, but also be like, again, have that knowledge and the facts and the data behind it. So, yes, at some point you will need to sponsor me, but I have a year on OPT and then I can apply for an extension, or, I will have potentially 3 years in OPT. So that will be sometime down the road, that kind of thing. And then, in terms of asking, if they would sponsor you, I'm a little more unclear on that, I guess. I think maybe that could come at like either the very end of the interviews, and again, if you've already answered it in an application, then I wouldn't bring it up because they know. So they probably wouldn't be interviewing you if there wasn't a chance that they were thinking of sponsoring you.
But I think to your point of like being knowledgeable about the visa process, and I think that can go a long way, because a lot of times an employer might be familiar with it, but they may have questions too. And so if you know what you need, then that's going to help them. So know your visa process. And doesn't Mireille do quite a few workshops?
Yes, and so she's been doing the OPT workshops, and coming up in early spring, we'll have an H-1B visa workshop with an attorney. So definitely look out for that. And then another resource is that we should at some point finalize between our two offices is this employer guide to hiring an international student. So that could be something that you would take to an interview and be like, oh, here, by the way. So we'll try to finalize that for spring.
Yeah. I think though, to kind of round it out about your initial question, when should you ask about it? Like, if you've already filled out the application process, don't worry about talking about it in the interview. It may come up, and maybe let it come up on their end if it does in that initial interview, and then maybe kind of let them offer you the position, and then those types of logistics of hiring you can come up then. That would probably be my advice.
I
Every
agree.
situation's unique, so.
Yep, I agree.
All right, I don't think I have too much left, but let me get the. All right, so you've made it through your interview. Phew. All right, so what do you do now? Please, please, please think about writing a thank you note. And it doesn't have to be, a traditional note in an envelope that you mail. I think that it is fine to have that be a thank you email. That's great nowadays. if it was with one person, you could send it to one person. If you met with a few different people, you could send a thank you note to multiple people. But either way, what that does is that brings them back around to your interview, and it leaves kind of a good lasting impression. You can also, just a little bit, don't go overkill, but if there's something that you forgot, you could add it into a thank you note portion of a little like, hey, just wanted to mention blah, 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 blah. Thank you so much for your time and all of that. But please follow up with the people you interviewed with. It is absolutely acceptable to take notes either during the interview or potentially as soon as you're done to just, get things on paper about, how you thought it went, things that they said. So you can take notes if you are asking your questions of the interview, that kind of thing. So feel free to do that as well. And then to do anything for next steps that they suggest for you. So that may be contacting certain people, that may be completing different types of forms. It can really vary, and there may be nothing. That may be everything on their end, where if they say, hey, you know what, we're going to be getting in touch with people in the next week or so, then you've got your timeline. And so that is an important piece of kind of ending the interview is what is the organization's timeline. So when will they be reaching back out for either a second interview or whatever the next step may be? So that may be hiring, that may be a denial type letter, whatever it might be. You want to know when it might happen. And I will say that companies are notorious for having things like, I feel like it's on either end. Sometimes companies work really fast, and then sometimes companies will just kind of drag their feet because a lot of people are involved in the decision making. So the last thing on the slide says follow up with them if necessary. So let's say they said they would, let's see, it's Thursday today. They say they're going to get back to you at the end of next week and you don't hear anything. I would say usually give them an extra day. So maybe give them Monday. And then, we also don't want to bombard people with emails on Monday. And then maybe email or call on Tuesday and just say, hey, I'm just, wondering, I haven't heard anything at this point. Do you mind sharing what your next steps are? So it's perfectly fine to follow up with them if it's been longer than what they said it would be for them to be contacting people. So you don't want to be sitting around waiting for 2 to 3 weeks with no contact from them. All right. So some last tips to think about before we open it up to some questions is remember to get specific when you're answering those behavioral questions, when you're answering specific questions about skills. Get specific, give them examples of how you have obtained the skills or how those experiences are going to have given you, skills that are going to be useful to the company. Be genuine. It kind of goes back to the question of the strengths and weaknesses. We're all human. We obviously want to put our best foot forward in an interview. But at the same time, I think it's okay to show who we really are. Make eye contact. And I think that this is, and maybe Sarah, you could speak more to this, but this is important in an interview process because it shows, at least here, it shows confidence, and then it shows a connection to when you're talking back and forth with the people you're interviewing with. And practice. I have mentioned this a lot, but practice, before your interview, practice with us at the Career Center, practice with a friend, practice with the mirror, write things out, whatever it is, however you best work. You can't really wing. I mean, you can wing an interview, like you can go in there and just go for it, but you're going to have a much higher rate of having success if you practice. And then just lastly, don't pick out anything to wear or that's too distracting. You want them to focus on what you're saying and your answers rather than what you're wearing or what you're smelling like or the gum you're chewing or anything of that nature. And I think those are my major like interviewing thoughts, tips, tricks. Fran, Sarah, anything to add at this point?
Well, I was just going to add that I think, first of all, I haven't interviewed in a long time because I've been here for a long time, but I always thought of like each interview as kind of practice. So you interview, you don't get the job, okay. But I would look back and be like, okay, like how did I answer that question? Because chances are they're going to be very similar questions. And so I would definitely kind of like evaluate things, just kind of give myself a debrief after each interview, and you do as you go on, like figure out like what they're looking for, and you perfect your answers. So don't be discouraged if you're doing a million interviews and you're not, it doesn't seem like you're getting a job, because every interview is useful to you in some way, shape, or form. So you all guys are all brilliant UMaine grads, so I'm sure you won't have many interviews, but just think of it as a practice every time, and like I said, do a little debrief with yourself.
That's fabulous advice. I'm really glad you brought that up. And I just want to add one thing to it. Sometimes it can be appropriate to follow up with an employer, and especially if you did not get the job. It can be okay sometimes to follow up with an employer and say, do you have one or two tips of something that I can do better for the next time I interview? And not every person or employer will give back in that way, but some will. Some will want to help, develop you professionally, and will give you feedback on the interview. And so it cannot hurt to ask. Okay. I am happy to answer any questions. You can unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat.
Fran, did you have some thoughts?
I was just going to add, I did mention this last time if anyone was in the last Career Center session, but I'm a big advocate for international students knowing exactly what qualities they have just by virtue of being international students. And this is all stuff that's going to be on our website, but there are some skills and assets that you guys have that you might not even know about, like being adaptable and flexible and open to new cultures, being able to problem solve, being open-minded, things like that. And those are important to think about and have examples for, especially if they're qualities that are in the job description and that the employer is looking for. And the other thing, this is kind of nitpicky, but maybe you know more about this, Lisa, but when you send the follow-up note, I've heard that it's important to not wait too long, like do it pretty promptly, like within 24 hours. And don't mention any mistakes. If you like had something that you realize you messed up, if you mention it in the follow-up, it will probably just bring more attention to it and will do more harm than good. And then also in that email, make sure you do avoid asking about salary and benefits and stuff like that. So yeah, those are my notes.
I support all of that, Fran. That sounds great. And that goes back to the students, when you're preparing for an interview, talking with people about it, talking with Fran or talking with Sarah or whoever in, OIP, or coming to us and just thinking about like, what skills do you have as an international student? Because you come here with so many just life experiences that translate into skills that are really useful in the workplace. And so making sure that you know how to articulate that. That's a great point. And absolutely, I support sending that email, maybe not in the first 10 minutes, but definitely within 24 hours. And you never want to highlight things you did wrong. Never do that, because you're right, Fran. It just makes people think about that again. So I see, Ella, you have a question in the chat. So if I'm sure folks can see it, but basically any tips for the phone interview, which oftentimes has occurred before an in-person interview. It's kind of that weeding out stage, which, although nowadays things are blurred, right? There aren't as many phone interviews. People are jumping straight to video interviews, which is a whole nother level and difference. And then maybe not even doing an in-person interview. So I feel as though times have changed. Things are are interesting right now. I think that some of the same things will apply, right? Practice working through all of those questions that you think you might be asked. At the same time, though, a phone interview, or at least maybe we frame it as like that initial interview. Oftentimes, it's not going to be as lengthy. It's going to be quick. I spoke to a student the other day who was applying for a position with the Attorney General, and her interview was 10 minutes long. And this is just the initial interview. And so it's any of those initial interviews could be a lot shorter. They're probably going to be longer than 10 minutes, most are, but they might be 15, they might be 20. And so you won't be asked very many questions in that time period. And just knowing that they're going to be probably a little bit broader, and they just want to get kind of that initial sense of who you are to see if you can make it to that next round. If it is a video type of initial interview, all of the same Zoom etiquette applies, right? Making sure you have a good background, making sure that what you're wearing is appropriate, that everything works technically to make sure that everyone can hear you and see you. I think is really important. But most of the time, those initial interviews are less in depth. Any follow up with that, Ella, or does that answer enough?
I'm not sure everyone can hear me. And this is a good time that I want to give a little prompt is to I am really bad in phone interviews in general. And in a way that so be sure to practice definitely to answering questions, but do it out loud. I realized that I am the kind of person who tend to practice in my head and be like, I know the answer of this one. I kind of write it down as well too, but when I actually trying to talk about it, that become quite a bit of struggles, and especially if English is not your first language, that kind of put in quite a bit of barrier on that. Just typing in the chat in general about that too is to be sure to utilize the Career Center for mock interviews, to actually having the space to be able to answer those questions out loud again. That really helps, and like I said, don't practice it in your head, and having a space, and even just your friend asking that question and you answering those, you'll be shocked how much you wish you practice more or wish you have another place to do that. And the Career Center also offers space as well too, that you can do phone interview as well as Zoom interview. So if you don't have a quiet space at home, there might be a lot of distractions, or you might just have a very noisy neighbor, or you might have roommates or anything else to that. Utilize a space for that, because being very grounded during your interview always help. And I actually have another follow-up question is to another very, I have a few things that I am not so good with interviews. One is I drag on to my answers too long, for example, now. And but at the same time, like, how do you stay calm, and then how do you, don't get so that I remember this time very devastated, and then just be like very hectic just because I really need this job. How do you stay focused, stay calm, and just not shaking during your Zoom interview, even though it might be in the back? So just any tip would be very helpful, Lisa.
All great questions and great points. Thanks, Ella. Let me talk about the first one that you mentioned. Yes, we have spaces for interviewing, and they all have computers in them, or they all have phones as well. So you can reserve them. They're obviously free, but you can do that through our front desk. So that's a great resource to have if you need that. In addition to that, so how do you deal with, let's deal with the dragging on. And this is a big deal, because people will just completely drag on their answers. And that's where everything comes back to practice. And even in your questions about having, being a little bit anxious and nervous and, not knowing exactly what to say, it really comes down to practice. And I don't think you can practice enough for interviewing. And it's hard to practice because it's putting ourselves out there, and we're having to answer these things that make us a little bit uncomfortable. But it's important to do it. Again, do it in front of a mirror. Sometimes, however it works best for your learning style. For me, I like to write stuff down, then I like to practice saying it out loud, and then I like to practice it with, another human. And and so that for me is the way I do it. And so whatever way that you kind of work up to feeling prepared is a good way to go about it. So you know yourself best. But that preparation is going to help you feel more confident in the interview. Is it okay to be anxious and have a little bit of nervousness? Absolutely, that's normal. I think if people weren't a little nervous, you'd probably go in there and just be overconfident and probably give the wrong impression. So I think it's okay to have a healthy amount of nerves. And then also realize that almost every single interview, you're going to be asked a question where it's probably going to throw you off course. You're not going to expect it. And that's okay. That's probably the intent of the question. And with that, I would just say it is okay to stop and wait and think. And I think that we don't do that enough. I think people feel that pressure of silence and they're like, oh, I've got to talk, I've got to say something. It's okay to say, that's a really great question. Can I have a minute to think about it? And you can even jot down some ideas. That's fine. It may feel uncomfortable, but it's okay to do that. And it shows that you're taking the time to answer the question. And so I don't know if I answered all of your thoughts. Oh, well, and maybe at the end. So let's say you did not get the job. And so that is one more learning experience. Sarah mentioned to kind of like, sit and debrief and think about how it went for you. Jot down some notes and say, I could have this question about my leadership style, I could have answered better. Okay, practice for the next time around. So feel free to kind of debrief and talk with yourself when it's done.
Lisa, there are a number of questions in the chat. So Geeta is asking, is it better to have a shorter or longer time for an interview? And I think it probably depends, right?
I think it depends. You don't want to go longer unless the interviewer says so. Oh, it's okay. Like, we'd like to ask you a few questions. You have a little bit more time. You need to be respectful of their time. And hopefully they're respectful of yours by giving you some time to ask questions at the end and not going over, but you don't want to be the one to push something past its time. Okay. If you
sorry to interrupt, but I think that's where like being succinct is helpful, because I've interviewed people where I had like time for 6 questions, but then like we only got through 3 because they were very long answers. So you want to make sure that you're being succinct so that you allow them to drive it more or less.
Agreed.
Abigail's asking about using Zoom like background filters, which I assume is okay as long as it's appropriate. Or
I agree too. I think as long as it looks good and it's appropriate, that's fine with me.
I will say that just on the many Zoom meetings that we've all been on, if it's not like, if it's some sort of weird green screen and you're kind of fading in and out of it, that's very distracting. So just make sure that looks good and you're not moving around too much. And then Prashanta, are interviews for academic jobs like postdocs, assistant professors, different from interviews for industry jobs? Are there different strategies for each?
Yeah, I think every interview is a little bit unique, to be honest. But I do think that academic positions might have an additional element to it. You might have to present potentially on your research or about something that you'd be working on. And so oftentimes it includes some type of presentation or a discussion about your philosophy of teaching and that type of thing. working in higher ed, I've been on a lot of search committees, and roughly they're like a half day long. You know, you meet with different groups. You might have a presentation. You might need to get a tour of things. So they usually are lengthier. And they probably include that additional element of you having to do something other than just answer questions. Are there different general strategies for the two? Mostly things come back to preparation. And I can't stress that enough, is preparing for all types of questions. And if you have a presentation or something along those lines, making sure that you've done your research and your work to get it ready to go for whatever you're presenting on. Sometimes, go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, it's somewhat obvious, but you know, if you're applying to be an assistant professor, so you have to have all that research and knowledge background, but then you have to have the skills to be an effective teacher, right? So so that may not be required in an industry job. You may just be in a lab doing your thing. So I think academic jobs, there's a lot more emphasis on, okay, well, great, you're a hotshot, you know, researcher, but like, how can you actually teach that? So you're going to have to emphasize that as well.
Absolutely right. In academia, you're focused on, you know, research, service, and teaching. So making sure that you're able to address, you know, those three major things if you're postdoc or continuing on for a professor position. Any other thoughts, questions?
Okay, and I'll do a little plug as well too. And I'm pretty sure the Career Center has tons of resources on it. I love personally use the Muse. Is one of the websites that was online that I found it very helpful. And you can find tons of questions that generally ask, very common asked questions that you can kind of fetch it out. So you don't have to come up with questions on top of your head and then, you know, trying to like, answer some of the questions and kind of just get into the interview mode about that. And it's always very scary, a little bit, you know, at times, no matter how much practice you have as well too. And just be sure to give plenty of times, you know, before the actual interviews, and then showing up at least 10-15 minutes, just be fully ready and then get into the mindset about that. That really, you know, not just be like, I just drop off all the groceries and now I need to jump into an interview kind of things, to leave plenty of space before and also after that if you need to just, you know, dissect it a little bit or just, you know, come back from it as well too. Either you have a good interview so you can celebrate a little bit, or if it didn't go so well, then you can kind of reflect on it as well too. Just building those times, be gentle to yourself, and it's a lot of things. I think we see it quite often in time is a lot of people get, if you're inundated with applying for job interviews, and then also with the timelines about, because the immigration status, it can get very stressful as well too. You know, reach out to your friends and then be sure to talk to other people about it. You have a great support system in our office, in the career centers, and also your friends as well too. So, you know, don't be afraid to talk in general. And I want to personally offer that if you reach out to any of us in here, just be like, hey, can I do a quick mock interview or anything else to it? We're more than happy to do that. That, you know, we might not know the industry specific questions, but at least we can give you some tip and pointers about how you're answering questions, and what the skills and what are some of the other things that we can help as well too. And even you can talk to your advisors and professors or your really close friends who might be really good at interviews in general. Those are the resources. It's always been there, so don't be afraid to reach out. For me, it's a very daunting and scary process. It can be, and then we can just, you know, walk through it together. So you're not alone in this. You know, we cannot interview for you, but you're not alone in this.
I also want to mention that I know when I get nervous, I'm not taking in the information properly. So it's perfectly acceptable to ask them to like, oh, could you ask me that again? Or could you rephrase the question? Or, you know, oftentimes there's like a 2-part question or a 3-part question, and like, you remember the first part, but can't remember the second and third. So it's fine to say, oh, would you mind remind, can you tell me again what the second and third or whatever? That's pretty common, I think.
Yeah, I'm the same way, Sarah. Again, it's okay to take a break for, a minute to think about how to answer something, or to have them repeat something, or even have them to explain the question to you. Because not everyone is a skilled interview question writer. So. And just remember, from all of these sessions that we've done, they're all, kind of scratching the surface on things. Like Ella said, use your resources. There are so many people that are here on campus and beyond, that want to help you get prepared to get a job. So use your resources, reach out. If you don't reach out, we don't know how to help. So any last thoughts, comments, questions?
Lisa, how to reach you, or what's the best way to get some resource on the career centers in general?
Fabulous question. So you can call our front desk. You can email us at umaincareercenter@maine.edu. You can live chat us from the webpage. Some of us have booking links, which are in our staff bio page on our website. And you can come and visit us in person on the 3rd floor of the Union. So all of those ways. We're open roughly, 8 a.m. to 4:30, but some of us will do evening hours as well. So we might take a Zoom appointment during the evening time. So a lot of different ways to get in touch with us.
Great. Well, I want to thank you, Lisa, again, and Fran for putting this together. Over the break, Fran and I are going to be talking about kind of next semester, what will be happening in our career series. Hopefully chatting with you again, Lisa, on that as well. And then, like I said, we'll be doing some H-1B information sessions and other things like that. So keep your eyes out for announcements. And Mireille again is doing OPT sessions, so attend those. And thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.